seems like the life in Alaska was probably a lot more like a Midwestern life. People doing all of the things that they do, hunting, camping, things of that nature. And it's weird because a lot of us think that the the two states that are not on the continental U.S. are nothing like the rest of the United States. Um, and the lifestyles that I'm finding out when I meet people from Hawaii, I meet people from Alaska, that they're very similar, and there's a lot that we have in common. But since they're not a part of the continent, or that we haven't really been there, most of us haven't been there, we don't see the similarities. But that's great. That's good to know. All of us that grew up, we just knew that Eskimos lived in Alaska, and that was it. There was no big cities as far as we were concerned when we grew up. As we got older, we started to find out. But it's very very important, I think, for all of us to sort of eliminate the ignorance that we were brought up with, and ignorance just meaning that we don't know. Um, there's a lot of things that we were told that were just told to us just for us to maybe sit down and be quiet. And some of those things we definitely need to figure out now, that they're not exactly the way that they were told to us. So tell us more about the Mason West Group. I know that you've been involved in a lot of different community-based activities. Tell us what this organization is doing and how it came to be.
Yeah, basically, um, I got involved in community development. I realized that the changes that needed to happen in the community needed to be systemic change. It started years ago. I think it was 1999 or 98. I started working for the city, first Madison County, and then the city of Huntsville for a federal program called Weed and Seed, which was started under the first George Bush. And the idea of the Weed and Seed program was to give communities money. The community I worked with in Huntsville, Alabama was called the Terry Heights community. And what the federal government would do was give a community money to form a steering committee that would partner with law enforcement to weed out crime out of the community. And then after the crime had been weeded out of the community, to plant seeds of social programs to help the community overcome, the damage that gangs and drugs had done. So I had the fortunate opportunity of working with the FBI, the DEA, the Justice Department, Sheriff's Department, all these police entities, where we would set up programs to get crime out of the neighborhood through a form of community policing. The idea of kicking in doors didn't necessarily work. Many times that caused just as much trauma to a community, as the drug enforcement itself. So there were more proactive programs. And then what we found is it's easy to get crime out of the community with community policing, the development of neighborhood watch programs, partnering with the community, and then seeding in positive programs. So that went really well in that community of about 10,000 people. Because of the success of the program, I became a consultant for the Justice Department and got involved in gang prevention, intervention, and treatment, where I would go around to different cities in the country and provide training for weed and seed organizations, sometimes law enforcement, or sometimes other organizations. And that was the impetus and ethos behind the development of the Mason West Group. I started doing that. Then I started doing the same thing in England, in a community or a city called Wolverhampton. And I partnered with two women and we started a nonprofit there called EYES, Engage Youth Empowerment Services, to do the same thing, the same type of intervention in the community. And then that transformed into counterterrorism work, that I was doing there, which led to me doing things with the State Department and different embassies around the world. And that's pretty much where the Mason West Group got started and where we are right now.
Wow. Now tell me, going from someplace like Huntsville, Alabama, right, all the way to England, what was the what was the big change that you saw in the, I guess, the perception of black men? Because we have a perception here in America that is pervasive, and I'm sure that there are some things that are different across the water. So what did you see differently over there as far as that was concerned when you were dealing with the same problem you're dealing with over here? How did you see the difference in the perception of our community?
Well, the challenge that we as black men face and people of color around the world is the first of all a narrative that allows us to be characters that are not the main characters in any story. We're not allowed to be the protagonist or the antagonist. We're not allowed to be multidimensional. We're not allowed to be dynamic. We find out at certain points in our lives that we are minor characters. We are background characters. We are foil characters. And that came to my attention when I was in England. I was there with the Midlands Police Department doing a gang intervention program, and I was primarily working with Black youth. But I happened to influence some young people of Pakistani descent, but who were English citizens. When I got back to the United States, I was contacted by this program that was based on, it was called Prevent. And at that time, terrorist activity had been growing, but it was a different type of terrorist activity. They started finding out that there were young people who were college age. They came from good families, and they were doing these stabbings. They were getting involved in these terrorist activities. There, in 2007, I believe it was, these young men boarded buses and blew themselves up, and that was a different profile from what they had identified before. Usually the terrorist was someone who came from a very poor community, who had nothing to live for, and they were able to convince them that you won't have any wealth or voice or participation in society here on earth, but if you martyr yourself, you will have it in heaven.
Right.
But now there were these young people, like this one person who became quite infamous. His name was, they called him Jihad Johnny. He was this young man from England, had gone to school for IT, came from a good family, but he was killing people on, live television. I don't know if you remember that. Eventually, they got him. When I say live television, I mean on video streams. Wow. They would capture people. What I discovered was the same thing that was affecting those young men there is affecting young men here. And that is, you're told this narrative that if I go to school, get my education, if I comply, if I, fit into American society, then I will have a piece of the American dream. But then you find out that that's not true. No matter how high you try to go, you have no voice, right? And that reality that was plaguing people of color here in America was the same thing that was plaguing people of color, in Europe. That was the case in England. Later on, when I was doing work in Belgium, you had all these people that seemingly followed the American dream or the right dream, but they realized at some point, I have no voice, right? These guys will kill me. They will determine my place in the world. They'll determine my value, and so it was easy for them to be radicalized. And that's what I found was a similarity between what people around the world were going through in systems that were governed or structured by white supremacy.
Wow, that's very interesting. As you know, I had a chance to travel a little myself and work in the Middle East for 2 years, and it was odd to see that there was so many similarities. There's so many things that we think are just happening here in America, and we're taught that. I was taught that America was this big melting pot. But when I flew to Qatar to get my flight to Kuwait, and I stayed there for 4 hours in a layover, I saw people of every ethnicity there possibly was, and I was shocked. It's like I thought America was the melting pot, but here in a country I had never even heard of before, I'm seeing people of almost every single nationality coming and going. In fact, there were so many people expected there every day that the cashiers at the restaurants took money from different countries. You know, you could have whatever kind of money you wanted, and they would switch their cash register to take that money. So it made it seem like, okay, this is the true melting pot. This is happening all over the world, not just here in America. What was the perception of you that the people gave you coming from America as a black man in America coming to help them with issues? Did they receive you well, or were they sort of confused about why you would be coming out there to help when we have so many problems here? What was that like?
Well, what I discovered when I was initially called to go to England to work with that program, I gave a little pushback. As I said, you want me to come work with Arab young men? I'm a black man. They're English citizens, descendants of Pakistan. I'm American. They're Muslim.
Uh,
I'm a Christian. So I didn't understand what the attraction was. And then when we went there and we did the program, and the program was successful, I remember meeting with people, you know, from the police department and people from the national government who came and wanted to know how I was able to work well with these young men. And what I discovered was when I was in an initial discussion with one of these young men, like I said, college student, intelligent, nice. I didn't see how this person, you know, could be radicalized, or even the government would think they would be radicalized. And in the process of our discussion, I can't remember what I said, but this young man said, "Well, America is the beast," right? And
wow.
then he went into Council of Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergs, and the Rockefellers, Rothschild, all this conspiracy theory, right? And once he said that, I knew where his mind was. And the reason why I knew where his mind was is I was raised Seventh Day Adventist,
Wow.
right? And Seventh Day Adventist is a eschatological church that constantly taught you to look at end time events. You were taught really not to trust government, that
Yeah.
everything that happened, there was a conspiracy that led to the Pope that was leading to the second coming. And you started to think in these absolutes. So when I grew up, if you went to church on Sunday, you either going to get the mark of the beast or you had the mark of the beast. And you didn't realize it, but you were slowly starting to devalue life. Once you believe that the activity in which a person is engaged right now is leading them to hell, right? You can accidentally believe that they're already in hell, or they're already hell bound, or they're spiritually worthless. I used to wonder why Muhammad Atta could get on that airplane, take off with all the human beings, children and married couples and businessmen on the plane, and then fly it into a building and kill them all. Well, to him, in his mind, they were already hellbound. They were already spiritually dead, right? And then I saw, because I had kind of gone through that experience, I saw where that young man was coming from, right? So through conversation and through interaction, I was able to eradicate in his mind what was once in my mind, the absolute. And that became the secret, because most people who grow up in very strict religions begin to believe in an absolute good and an absolute bad, an absolute right way and an absolute wrong way, and you don't realize that you are kind of being deceived into thinking or believing that someone else's existence is worthless because they don't believe as you believe. So that became the difference between me and someone else who would engage these young people. And I find that whenever I've been asked to come to a country and engage young people, whether it's leadership or any other type of program, that's I won't say the secret, but
No,
that's the tool that I use to help them.
that's amazing. I have often said to people that the more I grow, the older I get, the more I realize that most things are relative. Absolute is something that you think everything is when you're young, but as you start to experience and especially if you get to travel, when you start to travel, you realize that though something might have been true where you lived, it was just maybe true for that bubble or for that space where you lived or that time when you lived in. But when you start to travel and you realize that you might be the odd one when it comes to the whole world, you're thinking because I'm around these people and this is everybody that I know, that this is the norm. And it's not. And so I'm really glad to hear you say that, and really glad that that was something that you were able to use. Traveling in different parts of the world showed me the um, the folly of some of the things that I believed in, the folly in some of the things that I thought had to be, and the way that my personality and my approach to people was through these belief systems. And once you can start to realize that everybody has something that they believe in, and that their belief systems are valid to them, whether they are valid to you or not. They run their lives. Living in a Muslim country for 2 years, I started to see things that I would never have seen living here in America. Things that people did and things that they believed Allah was doing for them, and who was I to say he wasn't? It was it was happening. These things were happening. They were prospering. They were doing well. They were living life on a high level. And who's to say that their God was wrong and another God was right? So I definitely understand that. I wanted to know more about how the American thing kind of worked. I know when I was in Kuwait, people were often shocked when I would open my mouth and speak because they thought that they thought I was one of them. I think my complexion, my beard, my afro at the time, everything was just like, all the guys over there in Kuwait. We all looked exactly the same, whether they were Indian, whether they were Kuwaiti. When I went to Egypt, when I went to Oman, Dubai, anywhere I went, I seemed to fit in because they were people of color. And when they would speak to me in their languages or in Arabic or in an Indian language, and I would speak back and let them know I didn't understand them, they were in shock. Like, you're
Yeah,
American?
I never had that problem. When I or that challenge when I've gone, usually I've gone um under the jurisdiction of the State Department or
Okay.
US Embassy. So it's quite obvious I'm American, as soon as I get there.
Right.
Now, even when I was out on my own, I loved walking the streets of Egypt,
Yeah. Oh,
you
yes.
know, going to the market and things like that. And but still, I think it was just always obvious. I don't remember being mistaken, um, for being from that country or not being American. I would love for that to have been the case. Now, Brussels is a little different because Brussels is cosmopolitan. So someone may speak to me in what is it, French or Dutch,
Right.
initially. But when I've been in Africa, when I've been in Egypt, that hasn't been the case.
Wow. Okay. And see, the reason why I brought that up was it was amazing to me that when you said American to these people, they didn't think of Black Americans. To them, and when I was in the Middle East, when you say American, they thought of Caucasians, and that's just what they thought Americans were. I mean, they knew we lived there, but they talked to us as if we weren't really American. No, you can't. You're probably more into what we're into than what they're into, and it was shocking to see that there was some sort of camaraderie or at least surface compassion between us because we were people of color. And I think that somehow in America we have been taught that this is the only place for us, and if we don't survive here, there's nowhere we can go where we will be accepted. How have you?
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, yeah, um, when I've traveled, I appreciate being American. I appreciate the freedoms I have. as an American, but I do believe that I could live in other places of the world. You know, people that are, close to me who have not traveled abroad, if I say I'm going, to Egypt, they're, oh, they're fearful, like
Right,
something bad will happen in Egypt. But I felt perfectly fine
right,
walking the streets, of Egypt,
right.
and some of the most beautiful, some the kindest people,
Yeah,
you know, and wherever I've gone, in the world, um, I felt that way. But I do think there is that type of, and I don't know how else to put this. There is that American type arrogance and
right.
sometimes ignorance, right? That you are totally 1000% safe here, but once you enter another country, man, you're in trouble, and that just has never been the case for me.
That's true. I mean, I'm glad that I was able to see it as well. When I moved back to New York in December of 2016, I was moving back from Nashville, and I had a car with Tennessee plates, and immediately I was getting pulled over by police. And this is early 2017, when a lot of people were getting, still a lot of black youths and older people were getting killed by police. And I'm getting pulled over on a regular basis. Never got a ticket, pulled over, and I wouldn't say harassed, but for no reason. I got my plates changed to New York plates. I thought that was going to change it. Didn't change it. I was still getting pulled over, quite frequently. I got pulled over about, let's say, 20 times. And
Wow.
um, when I left in 2018 to go to Kuwait, I remember walking around in the city of Mabula with nobody late at night and feeling totally different than I felt in the Bronx, where I am from. In Thailand, walking around after coming from maybe a karaoke place and it's late, but I decided, instead of catching a cab or something, I'm going to walk back to where I lived, where I stayed. No problem. Never even thinking these people speak a different language. They don't know me. Anything can happen. Nothing. I was never worried, and it was weird to feel this type of safety and realize that people have told me all my life that I'm not going to be accepted in these other countries, but I felt safer than I felt in the place where I grew up. So it was very good to see that every place doesn't have the same thing that America has going on. And like you said, I do appreciate being American. I am happy for the processes and the things that have been afforded to me. But there is something that's very different that you feel once you get to go abroad. Um, I know that you're a parent, and so I'd like to know, with all that you've gone through, with all of the places you've been, with all of the programs you've been a part of, and all of the sort of motivation that you've had for young people, what is it that you teach your children to keep them in line to battle the stereotypes that surround us in our community?
Wow, good question. For my children, I've always taught them to question, everything,
Okay.
right? Not to accept anything as an absolute truth, except the fact that their parents love them and that God loves them, and that most things that they see um, in the world exist because of the interpretation or the development of flawed human beings.
Mm.
You know, um, that's kind of the basic lesson. Get as much knowledge as you can, question knowledge, and be wary of people presenting anything as an absolute truth or the absolute right way of
Yeah.
doing things. So I want my children to use their God-given gifts
Wow.
to question and explore, and that can be difficult because as a parent, you think that there's one way of doing things. You think there's one way that your children can be safe or be educated. And based on what I taught them, my children usually do things or make decisions or explore things that concern me, you know, that even times I tell them not to do that, but for the most part, because they are seeking to find their own path, they've experienced some successes, things I did not think would happen have happened because they've had a mind of their own. Everything from what is it to be a human being to race and ethnicity and other issues of belonging, citizenship and residency and knowledge. I want them to question it all because there are a lot of things that have us messed up as a country right now, have us messed up as a world right now because we refuse to question things. We don't realize that there are a lot of things that we are a part of, systems we are a part of, and even things that make up our psyche, our belief systems that are deceptions.
Right.
And I want them to be wary of that.
Well, that's great. I mean, I'm sure that it presents a challenge because to be a parent the way we were parented means to put down a line and a way of doing things. And to tell your kids, question all of that. You can't say question all of that, but don't question me. I mean, that's impossible. So you've basically set yourself up for a lot. But I do believe, like you said, that they will come out on top because of the way they'll be able to think, and that a lot of people will not be thinking the way they're thinking. Being open to thought is not as popular as we would want it to be.
Right.
And so, it's kind of hard to see some of your kids sometimes when they're with their friends, and after you've taught them this way, and they're not, your friends are not going that way. It's kind of hard. So, I applaud you for that. That's definitely something that's very positive. I definitely think that your kids will definitely come out on top because of that. How do you see the future, and I don't mean far in the future, I mean the immediate future of our African American community with all that has been going on lately? I mean, we've had an uptick in obvious racism. I don't think racism has gotten any worse. I think it's always been there, but of course now it seems to be on the forefront where nobody is afraid to say what they want to say. No one is afraid to sort of put things out there that are negative as far as Black people are concerned. One example is I just watched a documentary that Questlove did about a big concert series that happened in Harlem in 1969, same year as Woodstock.
Mhm.
And the footage was hidden for 50 years. Even the people who went to this concert didn't continue to talk about it for years. And of course, Woodstock is one of the biggest things. When somebody says they were at Woodstock, that almost makes them somebody. Um, the the trip to the moon was done that same time, and a lot of that was spoken about during that time. Why do you think that things that seem to contain Black people being the organizers and being the main participants still seem to be pushed aside? And what do you see as the future of that right now with us being so alert and so aware of all of these things?
Yeah, I think the cycle, of racial aggression will continue until we realize that the civic, social, economic, academic systems were pretty much set up, by a group of people who wanted to make sure, they maintained control of resources, right? And most of the things that we use to define ourselves are things that were designed to oppress us.
Mhm.
The major thing is race.
Right.
Race is a social construct that people think has existed forever, but pretty much came about, in the 17th, century.
Right.
You know, after this rebellion in Maryland, where white people and black people, all who were slaves, rose up against, you know, the governor of Maryland at that time, Berkeley, you know, because of their poor conditions. And they almost overwhelmed the people who controlled all the resources. Before that time, you know, European indentured servants and indentured servants or enslaved people from Africa had the same status. They got married, they slept together, they worked together. But what happened was when they found out that all these poor people could overwhelm the rich people, that's when they invented the concept of race.
Right.
They invented the concept of, you know, dividing people based on skin color so that they can give poor white people just a little more seniority than black people to divide them. You know, so even when we define ourselves based on race rather than ethnicity, we bought into a white supremacist, you know, concept, right? So even, and that is hard for us, especially as black people, to let go of.
Right.
We think it's a white versus black thing, right? When it's really a rich versus a poor thing.
Right.
And so those are systems that we have to dispel.
Right.
Even though capitalism is a great economic system, the way it has been designed in America is to make sure you oppress a labor force, right? In order for others to control the resources. That's why all of these billionaires since the pandemic have gotten 10 times richer, right? You know, so I think what needs to happen in the immediate future is, number one, there has to be transformation in the education system.
Okay.
People have to be educated to know what these systems really are and how to dismantle them so that everybody can be truly free, right? That's the first thing, and I think, you know, that's my life's work. And then those who are educated in that area, we have to find a different way to communicate with each other. We still allow ourselves to fall prey to the divisiveness of the Fox News and MSNBC and CNN. We let that govern us. We let ourselves be slaves to the algorithms of social media, right? So we have a big work to do to, once we are educated about how all of this stuff works. That's
right.
You know, revealed in documentaries like The Social Network. And then we have to change how we communicate and interact with each other. I don't know necessarily how that will be done, but if it's not done, this cycle of racial aggression is going to continue.
Wow. And that's man, there's so many things that you're saying that I've thought about. I haven't said or expounded upon them the way you have, but I've told people a lot of times that racism is a great cover for classism. I mean, it definitely takes the attention off of what's really going on, and it makes it so bad that discussion on racism will happen forever, and that will be the battle, when the real battle is just class, and people want to stay where they are. And if the minority can stay at the top, then that will be exactly what they want to continue doing. There's one last thing I want to ask you about. We have some friends and I are constantly talking about the fact that there's a thing called a good man, okay? And it seems that a good man is different for non-blacks than it is for blacks, because we see people who have done good things and maybe they get caught up in a criminal activity or in something that's negative, but yet their status seems to stay for the things that they've done. But when it happens to someone in our community, everything they've done is thrown away. I'm sure one of the most popular we could talk about now is Bill Cosby. Even though his crimes are big and deserve, if he did them, they deserve punishment and all of that. I'm not taking that away. But he has done a lot of good things in his life. He has contributed to a lot of educational colleges, schools, all over the place, especially in the Philadelphia and DC area. He has done things that awarded him just fame and fortune from being the first black man on a series to be a co-star, a lot of things, Cosby Show, all of these things. Is it possible in our community to still have some type of status, even if you have been convicted of a crime? Or is that something that we should continue to just put these people down as if they never did anything positive at all?
In our community, I don't think that's possible, but that's because we've bought into this narrative, as I've said before. You know, when you think of characters in a story, in our country, we have the American dream. And when you think of characters in a story, you have main characters, right? A main character can be the protagonist or the antagonist. They could be the hero or the villain, right? And usually a black man is not allowed to be a main character, right? Remember, usually main characters are multidimensional. So let's take Batman as a character. You know, Batman does some pretty messed up stuff, but for good reasons.
Right.
You're allowed to see Batman angry, allowed to see him happy, he's allowed to be multidimensional and still be the hero. Right. But a minor character isn't allowed to do that. A minor character is one dimensional, right? A minor character is what you call a foil character, which is a character that only exists to expose or reveal the strengths of the main character, like a Jimmy Olsen to Superman. Jimmy Olsen's only purpose is to show that he's scared and he makes dumb decisions and gets in trouble so that it emphasizes Superman coming in to save the day. You know, black men, no matter how much money we make, no matter what we accomplish, the narrative in the American dream says you can only be a minor character where others can be a major character. And so and then on top of that, what our white brothers and sisters aren't the only ones that perpetuate that narrative. We've been taught to perpetuate that same narrative. We say little things like black on black crime, like white people don't kill each other, right? That's the narrative that we have, that we can only exist to kill and harm each other, but white people kill themselves kill each other with more frequency and greater percentage. The whole idea about fatherhood, right? When Pew Research did a study that found out that black men are just as much as engaged in their children's lives or more, or the whole black men in college versus prison. There are more black men going to college than are in prison. But the narrative that we've been given and that we follow is what allows me to answer that question with a no. Right now, you know, we look at black people and they can't make a mistake. And I'm gonna say one more thing on this. We've also been told we can only have one hero. We've also been told we can only have one Messiah. We can only have one Martin Luther King Jr. at a time. We can only have one Jesse Jackson at a time. We can only have one hero. Everybody else can be Justice League. Everybody else can be Avengers. Right? And so we've got to dispel that belief also, that we can only have one person that speaks for an entire ethnic group. No, there are a whole lot of us out here who are leaders and fathers and husbands and workers and things like that. And we can all move with force. So my response to that generally is we've got to change that whole narrative. And I think that will take some time, but I think if we focus on that, we will do ourselves and then beyond ourselves, the world a great service.
Wow, that's great. I don't think you have any idea how many of the things you said are the basis for this show that we talked about. So a lot of the things that you just mentioned are the reasons why I'm here doing this at all, because those things definitely need to be addressed. So I definitely want to thank you for coming through today. It has been great. Every time I talk to you, or every time I have the time to talk to you this long. It's always great. I always feel like I'm educated, like I leave a little different than I came. So thank you so much. I hope our viewers feel the same way. Ladies and gentlemen, Mason West III, founder of the Mason West Group. And listen, we will definitely be trying to come together as we evolve into our community to get to do some things with you in the near future. All right.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.